Welcome to Progressive Soup. I'm James Root, your guest host. With me tonight is Lynn Taborsak, a longtime participant in Danbury and Connecticut politics. Welcome to the show, Lynn.
Thank you, James.
Could you start off by giving the viewers just a brief synopsis of your background, your resume, so to speak?
Well, I'm a lifelong Danbury resident. My husband taught school here at Danbury High School for 40 years. I'm a former member of the legislature, so I represented Danbury and Hartford for 8 years. I ran unsuccessfully for Congress. I served a couple years on the Common Council. In fact, one of the issues we're going to talk about tonight, the Danbury Firefighter suit. In 2005, I was a member of the Common Council that approved some of these awful appointments to the Danbury Fire Department. I am currently the chair of the Democratic Town Committee in Danbury, and of course there isn't a busier season right now. We are electing a whole slate of new officers to be our state constitutional officers, so it's a big election, very busy, and I think people might want to know I'm a grandmother, a dog owner, a cat owner, and you roll it all into one, but very, very concerned about the city of Danbury and what I think are some bad changes in our community that really aren't getting scrutinized by the local newspaper. And I think probably a lot of people would agree with me that there's been a big change in the Danbury News-Times since it was taken over by the Connecticut Post.
Okay, but you think a major case in point in this is the lawsuit with the fire department, and you wanted to talk about that?
I wanted to talk about the Danbury Firefighter suit because it really wasn't very adequately covered by the Danbury News-Times. And we're talking about a lawsuit or an action that's been kicking around for 5 years. It's actually September of 2010 now. But Danbury has a civil service commission, and they create lists of eligible candidates for civil service employment in the city of Danbury. And you say, well, why do they have civil service? Well, I think everyone knows that back in the day, there wasn't civil service. There was political patronage. Your uncle did this, your nephew did that, your aunt did this. The jobs were given away as political favors in order to have a loyal following. But we have a civil service system. It's a system where there is not supposed to be any bias, any favoritism, any nepotism whatsoever in it. And most people would stand up and applaud and say, that's a good thing. I'd like to think that people would be hired on the basis of their ability. So, to make a long story short, in 2005, the city needed to hire entry-level firefighters. We needed them. And in order to begin that hiring and that appointment and send them out to training, the city had to create a list of eligible candidates. So they advertised for this position, and it's a great position. Men and women can both apply, but they advertised, and applicants paid a $75 fee, and they sat for an examination. So we're talking about a good job that's available, that you have to sit for an examination in order to qualify. All right, this happened in August of 2005. Anyone who was interested and paid that $75 could sit for the exam, and the result was that sometime in October, the City Civil Service Commission certified a list of eligible candidates. Now, you may not understand this, but in a competitive exam, if you're the number one, if you place first, that's great. And if you place 164th on the list, it's going to be a long while before they reach before they reach your number. So we have an exam. They actually sat for a written exam in August, and in September, there was an oral exam, which all of the candidates had to sit through. And the written exam counted for 60% of your rank, and the oral exam counted for 40%. Now, what do you get when you add 60 and 40?
100, last
100. I thought so too. So that there are no other elements in this competitive exam. 100% is 100%. So all of the candidates were ranked, and then some very unusual things happened. And this was in 2005. I think the most unusual thing was before the Civil Service Commission certified the list, the mayor appointed 6 candidates to the fire department for these positions. Now, what would you think who do you think he would pick?
Those were the best scores.
I would hope so. Well, what he actually did was on October 3rd, he asked the city council to approve number 3. That was one of his choices. Number 6, number 11, number 13, number 14, and number 15. And those appointments were approved. And that was round 1 from that list.
Let me just interrupt for a second, Lynn. Now, with the selection part, was that a typical modus operandi? Does the mayor typically make those choices?
The mayor has the sole authority to make those appointments. Nobody else. It's his sole authority. So in October of 2005, there was a first round, and he didn't pick number 1. He didn't pick number 2. We have no idea why he didn't do that. But the problem there was that he chose those candidates. He recommended their appointment before there was a valid list. The list was not approved by the Civil Service Commission until October 9th.
And that's
a no-no.
strange. That's a no-no. Okay.
That's a no-no. That doesn't follow your Civil Service rules. But all of the candidates who had sat for the exam were informed of their ranking. So I think they all had expectations that appointments would go forward and that people who scored higher on the exam would be picked before people who did less well, who did poorer on the exam, and that actually isn't what happened.
What were the rankings again that the mayor chose? Were the numerical
well,
rankings?
in his first rankings, it was 3, 6, 11, 13, 14, and 15.
Okay, that's skipping over a lot. Okay,
it's skipping over a lot. It gets worse than that. There was a second round of hiring because we did need entry-level firefighters, and that wasn't until March of 2006. And at that time, we were very happy to see that he picked number 1, but then it was 5, 9, 19, 21, and 24, so that he wasn't exactly going by the numbers. And
now, did he skip the commission on the second round too?
The commission creates the list. They certified it in October of 2005. Okay. That list is good for 2 years.
Got it. You
don't have to do it. You don't have to do it every year, but you have to create a list that's merit-based.
Got it.
That we know is devoid of any kind of bias or favoritism. It's just based solely on your ability in a competitive exam on how you ranked.
Okay.
And that isn't how it worked out. I think what people might be interested in is that the plaintiffs in the lawsuit, the people who sued the city because of these unusual appointments, were ranked number 8 on the list and number 18. So they were pretty good candidates.
Now, these lawsuits have what is the sequence here? How much time passed between? 2
years passed before a lawsuit was filed, and 2 more years passed before the lawsuit was settled.
Okay.
But I think the point I want to make is that we have 2 plaintiffs here. One who was ranked number 8 on the eligibility list. The other who was ranked 18th. And I have to tell you that in civil service, you would say a person who got a score of 40 is less qualified than the person who got a score of 8. I mean, that's how it works. And we didn't see that operate this way in this hiring. So there was a second round of hiring, and the numbers went all over the place. In July of 2006, there was another round of hiring, and this time, number 2 was selected, number 7, number 16. There was a 4th round in September of 2006, and I thought this was a very unusual appointment. The candidate who was ranked 53rd out of all of the other candidates was selected. all by himself.
And the lawsuit, by this point, the lawsuits had begun?
The lawsuits had began in 2007, so there weren't lawsuits yet.
There weren't. Okay, got it.
In February of 2007, there were 5 additional appointments made, and now we're looking at numbers that are ridiculous. Number 40 was selected, number 34, number 38. One of the selections in this this 5th round in February of 2007 was a candidate who was engaged to the daughter of the acting fire chief. Now, the fire chief has no authority to make appointments. That's the sole authority of the mayor. But it's certainly, given the number that he had on the exam, which was a 40, and the fact that number 8 was still not chosen at this point, 2 years after applying to be an entry-level firefighter, that the mayor requests the appointment of someone who is betrothed to the chief's daughter. This isn't right. I think this is maybe where the plaintiffs actually started thinking that there was something wrong, that mistakes were being made. Well, in June of 2007, there were 10 more appointments, and by now we're looking at the city choosing candidates who were 100th, 77th on the list. And in my mind, in a competitive exam, they were less qualified than the 2 candidates who had never been given an appointment. Finally, another 6 appointments were made in April of 2008 when the list had expired.
Okay.
So the list wasn't valid, appointments were made from it. One of the appointments had ranked 164 on the exam, and he was the son of the chairman of the Civil Service Commission. All right?
So that was another break in due process, that the list had expired.
How could you call it a break? Number 164 is picked before number 8. No, that doesn't make sense at all. So that's where we had a real case of the city not acting in good faith in terms of calling this a civil service eligibility list, calling it a merit examination, and yet picking people who were either relatives or going to be relatives of the fire chief, or people who were relatives of the chair of the Civil Service Commission. So I'm not surprised that the plaintiffs were able to sue, and in court presented all of these facts, and the end result was that the city of Danbury agreed to settle the lawsuit. What does that mean? It means that they were not going to take it to trial and say, we did nothing wrong, we're not at fault, we picked the very best candidates, we followed all the civil service rules.
So it's kind of a tacit admission of guilt?
I think so, it is. Yeah. It's a settlement. And it's a settlement that resulted in the city paying the plaintiffs $450,000, appointing them as entry-level firefighters, and in some way trying to make up for the 5 years of missed promotion and service credits that they would have gotten if they had been hired through the civil service process, as it should have worked. So here we have mistakes being made at the highest level, blatant nepotism, favoritism, and bias, and we have a newspaper in the city of Danbury that completely ignores this as an issue. So I write...
Can we mention that newspaper by name?
The Danbury News-Times. We are a single-town newspaper. So I was upset about that, and on June 1st, I wrote a letter to the editor, and I submitted it for publication. And it talked about the firefighter lawsuit, pointing out a couple of things. First of all, the cost to taxpayers of $450,000. I think, I'm glad they settled. I think these individuals were harmed by this process. I don't think it was fair. They should have been hired. So, you know, I support that. But it also cost us $180,000 to defend that lawsuit. In fact, I brought the bills, James. These were the bills that were presented to the city of Danbury to defend against this lawsuit. And I think that the agreement to settle was reached in early March, because we have a bill here for $334.32 for a very nice continental breakfast at Matrix, which is the old Union Carbide Center. So in addition to the cost, the $450,000, and the legal fees, the $180,000 that we had to pay to defend it, taxpayers weren't aware of this, and they weren't aware of it because there was no diligence on the part of the News-Times to report this. And I wrote the letter, I submitted it, and they had a terrible problem with my language. And I thought...
Your language?
I thought, I hadn't been profane, and I found out that the two words that they objected to, I hope I can say them on television, less qualified. I called two individuals less qualified, and they had a very big problem. How did you decide that they were less qualified? And it was like I almost had to explain what a competitive exam was. So we have a settlement. We have a newspaper that hasn't reported on any of the details, that refuses to print a letter to the editor showing a different or a minority viewpoint. Now, red flags should go off for everyone, and it's one of the reasons I brought this book. It was given to me by a good friend. It's called The End of America by Naomi Wolf. And
can we get a close-up, Kristen?
And people just take for granted that we live in a democracy, that we have a constitution that's very difficult to change, and we have a Bill of Rights, and we have laws, we even have a city charter. None of us are protected by any of that if we don't have a free and independent media that is willing to let people express opposing viewpoints, let people express their own truths as they see them, and that is probably the greatest danger that we are facing now. I think a result of that, when you have a paper that is not independent and is not free, is that you'll see a rise and increase in corruption, because the less information there is about what's going on, the more likely it is that something bad will be going on. And I almost think that I could join the Tea Party on this issue. I think this is something that Tea Partiers care very much about, that they want to know what their local officials are doing. They want reporting of the facts. They don't want the spin. They don't want the gray matter. They want to know what's going on. So Danbury residents don't know about this. They don't know that mistakes were made. They don't know that the mayor claims that they were only administrative errors. But when you have 8 rounds of hiring and you pass over 2 qualified candidates 8 times, it's not a mistake. You know, it's deliberate. It's deliberate.
Let's get back to the News-Times issue for a minute. Now, it's funny to almost hesitant to criticize the paper, because it's almost like a sacred thing, because newspapers, physical newspapers, are under such attack and assault financially. I feel almost grateful that the News-Times is available to buy, so it makes me less prone to criticize it. And you know, in lore and reading, you always hear about newspapers being connected with politics and politicians throughout American history.
Exactly.
But we usually talk about secrecy on a national level, but you see some of these things now happening on a local level.
We have this secrecy right here in Danbury. We don't have good coverage. And I called the editor of the News-Times, Art Cummings. He didn't return my call. I asked if I could meet with him. He had asked someone else on the paper to call me to ask where I got my information. For instance, how did I know that Mike Finn was Mike Finn's son? You know, it was in the complaint. It was in the papers that were filed in court. How did I know that Chief Kern's daughter was engaged to one of the candidates that they appointed out of order. It was in the court papers. Why didn't the News-Times know that? But Mr. Cummings wouldn't meet with me, and he didn't know how you could find out facts about this lawsuit. I thought that that's what reporters did as a normal course of action.
It's almost as if the hard facts frighten them off, because I read the editorials in the News-Times, and they're often very interesting, and a lot of them are very emotional and idealistic. It's almost as if your letter was too intimate in a way, with facts and details about locals and specifics, and maybe it sounds like that kind of frightened them.
Well, I think the real truth of the matter is that the Danbury News-Times is not going to be critical of Mark Boughton. Mark Boughton would have to commit a murder on Main Street in Danbury in broad daylight before they would criticize him. They are not going to be critical of this mayor. And I think that they're doing it because he's running for lieutenant governor, and wouldn't it be terrible if his hometown paper threw up some dirt about his making a mistake over and over and over and over again in this civil service competitive appointment process.
Now, Lynn, I mean, in addition to your professional achievements and achievements in politics, you've been a long-time Danbury resident. I mean, you know Danbury almost as well as anyone.
I was born here.
And so, I mean, using that experience, have you seen a change in the News-Times approach? I mean, for instance, when you were young, I mean, or younger?
Well, most people watching the show, if they've lived in Danbury a long time, know that the Danbury News-Times crucified Jim Dyer when he was indicted for possible dealings over the Ericetti project in downtown Danbury. Every single day, he was the sitting mayor. Every single day there were stories about what was going on in court and who was saying what to who, because the paper was actually trying to provide a service of telling people what was going on and letting them judge for themselves. We don't see that happen now.
And this was just back in the 80s, and you're saying they were very aggressive.
That's right. Now we get half-truths, we get no truths, we get no information. How can people in a community make choices, make decisions with no information? I love to see, for instance, bloggers like Al Robinson. He's challenging this print media that we have, but we're a one-horse town, and I understand that Mark Langlois is going to be starting another newspaper. But right now, they have no competition. They have no competition, and they have no incentive to scrutinize what is going on.
Now, what is it about, do you think, what do you think it is about the Boughton administration that might have caused this change with the News-Times? You mentioned the fact that Mayor Boughton might be running for state office, but it seems like these things started before that. I mean, what do you think? I mean, what
well, possibly there could be some relationship between Wayne Shepard leaving the News-Times and becoming Mark Boughton's chief of staff. That's like having the News-Times in the mayor's office. In fact, I know that if I had met with Art Cummings, I would have said to him, is it Wayne Shepard that doesn't like this letter? What is wrong with this letter? There's no profanity in it whatsoever. And I see a connection right there with the presence of Wayne Shepard at City Hall.
I didn't realize that. That's really a significant fact. That seems like not a conflict of interest. I mean, obviously you can change jobs, but it's an interesting thing to ponder over, I'm sure. I mean, I find it interesting.
I would certainly like to hear from other people who may have submitted letters to the editor and are waiting for their letters to be published. I like to think that they've singled me out, but I'm absolutely not sure with one newspaper in town that we're getting the kind of coverage and reporting that we need.
Now, it doesn't look likely that like the situation is going to change politically in the near future or with the newspaper. What are, I mean, offhand, what do you think are some possible ways that we Danburyans can compensate for this lack of communication, lack of knowledge about what's going on? I mean, I guess it's not all the government's fault or the media's fault. I mean, I guess maybe people should be more be looking harder for the information or take more interest,
well,
if possible.
I think it's really a hard sell to tell people who work for a living and are grateful that they have a job that after they get home and throw some dinner on a plate, that we want them to go down to City Hall to attend the Planning Commission, the Zoning Commission, the City Council meeting, and get all that information themselves. It is a great public service that Comcast Channel 23 will air. Council meetings, will air ad hoc committee meetings. That is wonderful, and they should be congratulated for that, because people can make their own decisions and choices when they see that live coverage of meetings going on that affect their town.
It's surprising, because I mean, you read about the dramatic national news and even state news, and I guess we tend to think local is unimportant or unsexy or whatever. But that's ironic, because what could affect you more immediately than what's going on right in your own town? It's surprising that people, in general, don't have more of an interest or see it as immediately vital to them.
So let's hope that we see more Board of Ed, more ad hoc committee meetings, more really public programming on Channel 23, and more viewers coming to see it for themselves, because they are so disappointed with the coverage in the local paper.
I mean, I recently started trying to go to town council meetings. I found them very interesting, but it wasn't easy even to find out when these were held, to tell you the truth. I mean, I called up the town hall, and according to them, the only place that the information is available is on the town website, and that's great, but not everyone's checking the Danbury website every day.
They actually have out in front of City Hall a glass-covered calendar or schedule of meetings, but once again, you're asking people who have their own lives to lead, who have jobs that they have to do, to go out every night of the week and find out what's happening in town. That's the job of the local paper. That's the job of the radio stations, and they're not doing that job well enough. We don't know enough.
Now, Lynn, you said you're head of the town Democratic Committee. We have about 30 seconds, 1 minute left. Or do you have any kind of sweeping statement or leadership for us?
I'd love to see people get involved as volunteers in this campaign. Come out, talk to voters, hear what they're complaining about. You'll always learn something. Okay, thank you very much, Lynn. It's been very enlightening, and we always appreciate your inside knowledge on Danbury and your way of expressing it. And I'll be writing another letter to the editor soon. Okay, we'll be looking for that. Hopefully they'll humor you this time, or hopefully they'll publish it. Yes, yes. Okay, thanks again. This is host James Root, and wishing you a good night from Progressive Soup. See you next time.